Welcome to the College of Legal Practice's latest webinar. This webinar is all about becoming a solicitor. And what we recognise at the moment is there are many choices for those who are already on a law undergraduate degree or perhaps have taken a conversion course. You do have that choice of whether you'd like to take the LPC or the SQE route to qualification. So this webinar is designed to help you think through that choice and to give you all the information that you need around the LPC and the SQE to help you make that choice. So I'm joined today by Sarah. Sarah, do you want to say a little bit about yourself?
Hello, yes, I'm one of the programme leaders at the college, and I lead particularly on the SQE2 preparation course. Prior to joining the college, I was a programme leader for the LPC at a big higher education institution, and I've been with the college for about 6 or 7 months now.
Thank you, Sarah. So Sarah's going to take us through the details of the LPC and the SQE route to qualification, but I'm just going to give some headlines to start with. And then we're going to look at towards the end of the webinar at some of the approaches that firms are taking, just to reassure you that the market is changing and moving, and whichever route you take, there are lots of opportunities for you. So the webinar should take a maximum of an hour. There is a chat bar on the right hand side. If you'd like to pop any questions in for us, we can take them as we go. You're very, very welcome, and we'll have a session at the end where you can also come on and chat and ask us any questions about your individual circumstances. So I'll just kick off now. Here we go. So as you can see, we're just going to run through the LPC, SQE, a little bit more detail about the SQE assessments. We're going to look a little at qualifying work experience and then the various exemptions and the detail around the two. And then just thinking about the top considerations when thinking about each pathway. So firstly, the LPC route to qualification. So this is one that you're probably familiar with, and right from sixth form you've thought would be the way in which you would qualify as a solicitor. So as you can see, there are 3 aspects to this route to qualification. The main one, obviously, we always talk about is the legal practice course, but of course you can't qualify as a solicitor without the training contract. So you've got the legal practice course. It's a full-time or part-time course, but it is a minimum of a year. You need to complete it after a qualifying law degree. So you do need that law degree or you need that conversion. So that has to be a graduate diploma in law to start that legal practice course. It is assessed by lots of different providers. So as you will know, lots of different universities offer the LPC, and they do assess it to a common specification, but Sarah will go through the detail of that and what that looks like compared to the SQE. So there are core and elective subjects in the LPC, and again, you're probably very familiar with this, but it very much does cover a broad spectrum of legal practice areas, and you can select those electives to give you that foundation. In terms of the training contract, the main thing to say about this that I'm sure you'll be very aware is that 2 years of recognised training must be with a recognised training provider. So you need to find that employer who is a recognised training provider with the SRA who can confirm and run through with you the LPC into the training contract, and then also confirm with you at the end of the training contract you successfully completed it. So that is a requisite for you to become a solicitor through the LPC route to qualification. And then whilst you're doing the training contract, there is a small course called the Professional Skills course, and Sarah will give you a little bit more detail on that afterwards. So that's just a quick recap on the LPC route to qualification. Now, just looking at the SQE route to qualification, and just in case you're not very familiar with that, just looking at that together, we know it came live last year, and we know that it is replacing the LPC gradually over time. And at the moment, there are very much both options available. And we think that firms in a couple of years' time will be retracting from the LPC, but at the moment, they are both very much viable options to you to becoming a solicitor. So there are 4 things that you need to do to qualify as a solicitor through the SQE route qualification, and we've borrowed this from the SRA. So as you can see, it's any undergraduate degree or equivalent. It doesn't have to be a law degree for you to take the SQE. You need to look at SQE1 and SQE2. So there are 2 distinct stages of the SQE assessment. And they are independent of each other, but you must take SQE1 and pass SQE1 before SQE2. Then you also need to look at your substantial period of qualifying work experience. And we'll come on to that in a little bit later, but there's a huge amount of flexibility around your qualifying work experience. And then lastly, just like the LPC route to qualification, you do need to verify your satisfactory character and suitability to become a solicitor. So those are the four different aspects of the SQE route to qualification. And just a little bit more detail on the right-hand side of that slide, just looking at the SQE1 and SQE2. So as we said, they are separate from each other as two different sets of assessments. And once you start SQE1, you do actually have 6 years to complete and pass SQE2. So there is that flexibility within that, but you must take one before the other, unless you are exempt from SQE1. And actually, we'll come on to that a little bit later. If you have, there are some exemptions for both SQE1 and SQE2, depending on your qualifications and your experience. And then the qualifying work experience can really be done at any time, before, during, or after your SQE examinations. So just thinking a little bit more about the SQE. So here are some just key facts for you, just to pop it all on a page so you can see it. So the main difference here is it's one centralized set of examinations, and it's run by one provider, Kaplan. So everyone is sitting the same exams. Kaplan are the appointed provider by the regulator, the Solicitors Regulation Authority, and it's the same set of exams for everyone who takes it. Now, there are two sets of exams, two types, and some are written assessments. And in SQE2, there are both written and oral assessments. The written assessments can be taken anywhere in the world at Pearson test centres. So you can go to your, not necessarily always your local Pearson test centre. In England and Wales, it would be, but there are many, many Pearson test centres to choose from around the world. And you can take your SQE1 written assessments at those, and you can take the written component of SQE2 at those test centres as well. But the SQE2 oral exam at present can only be taken in 4 locations, 2 of them in London, Cardiff and Manchester. So you've got a smaller selection of places to take your SQE2 oral exam. And that's because of the nature of that exam and how it has to be set up in terms of an oral assessment. The exam fees are payable to Kaplan. So this is quite different from the LPC. So you have 2 sets of costs for you to consider. You have any preparation costs for the SQE if you want to do preparation training. And then you have your exam costs that are payable directly to Kaplan. And I think something that some of our students have found as well is that you do have to think just a little bit about the additional travel and accommodation costs as well when you're going to those assessments. So that is a consideration, because most people we found preferred to go up either the night before if they had an early exam, or they did have to travel just a little way to get to those assessment centres. Looking at the SQE1 assessment then, just quickly, this one is focusing on functioning legal knowledge. So it looks across 13 practice areas. It's spaced over 2 days in the same week. And you have 2 sets of examinations in those 2 days. And you have 360 multiple choice questions that you'll be going through across those 2 days. The exam fees for this year actually are £1,558. They're actually going up to £1,622 in next year. So SQE1 is all about your functioning legal knowledge and really gives you that foundation in the law of England and Wales. And what we would say also is if you haven't got any qualifying law degree, or you haven't got a conversion course, that actually you might need to think about doing that conversion, that short conversion course. We offer a graduate foundation in law for that. If you're interested in doing that prior to doing the SQ assessment, because it is really quite intensive and you do need to learn about all 13 areas of law. So if you haven't learned any of those to start with, then we would recommend you think about doing that as well. If you look at SQE2 assessment, the way the SRA were setting the SQE2 assessment up is they really were intending for you to have some work experience before you take SQE2. Now, that isn't the way that everyone is choosing to take SQE2, but because it's testing legal skills, The initial thought from the SRA was really you'd do quite a lot of qualifying work experience prior to taking SQE2. So you really would have actually developed quite a lot of legal skills, and then you would be tested specifically on those skills in the SQE2 assessment. As I've said, it's split into two. So there is the SQE2 oral and the SQE2 written. And actually, it doesn't just test legal skills. Our module is actually called Solicitors Legal Skills, but it is actually a test of your legal knowledge as well. So the SQE2, you do need to ensure that you've got those 5 practice areas that you really have got very familiar functioning legal knowledge with for SQE2, and you'll be tested on those skills in those 5 practice areas. So you've got SQE2 oral, which looks at advocacy and client interviewing, and then SQE2 written, that tests for written legal skills. Now, these assessments are more spaced out, but there are an awful lot of them. There are 16 stations, and it's over 5 days. Those 5 days tend to be split over 2 weeks, what we've seen so far as well. And then the exam fees for this year currently were £2,422, and they've gone up to £2,493. So they have gone up a little for next year. So that's the SQE. That's the key facts around that. And Sarah will take you through that in a little bit more detail in a moment. Just to touch on qualifying work experience, and we know that a couple of you who have joined us today are really interested in qualifying work experience. We'd be really happy to take any questions. So this is about the period of practical work experience that you need as part of your route to qualification. And the main thing for you to recognise is the work must develop some of those solicitor competencies that are identified by the SRA. It can be lots of different type of work. It could be voluntary work in a law clinic. It could be in-house. It could be around the world. It doesn't have to be based in England or Wales, but it must develop some of the solicitor's competencies. So when you're thinking about the work that you are currently doing or roles that you are looking to do, it's worth having that conversation really early on with your supervisor, your future supervisor, just to say, look, does the work I'm doing, meet those solicitors' competencies? It doesn't need to be all of them, but some of them for it to be qualifying work experience. So as I said, it can be undertaken anywhere in the world. You don't have to travel to take the work experience. But what you do need to do is have someone who is simply confirming that you have completed it, who is either an SRA regulated solicitor or an SRA regulated compliance officer. Now, we know that not all people can have someone like that in that particular role in your organisation, and that's okay. So what you do need is someone who has direct knowledge of your work, who can sign off your work experience. So if it isn't someone in your organisation, you need to work closely with them and your organisation and your supervisor or line manager to make sure that they have enough information around the work that you are doing to be able to feel that they can sign that off for you. And again, those conversations are really important for you to have at the beginning of placements or with your current line manager. As soon as you feel like you're going to take this route to qualification, we'd recommend that you start having those conversations to make sure you know you've got someone who signs it off. They aren't signing off the quality of your work experience, though. They are simply confirming that you have completed it, and you show them a record of what you've done. In terms of qualifying work experience, it is more flexible in the sense you can gain it in up to 4 organisations. So you could, for example, have 2, 3, 4 contracts with different organisations. It does not have to be with the same one. And also there's no minimum maximum length for those placements either. They don't need to be equal 6-month placements in the same way you might imagine you have 4 seats, 6 months each. So as I've said, it's very flexible. You may have already gained some qualifying work experience. You may simply need to do SQE1 and SQE2, and you may be straight in there applying to be a solicitor, or you may wish to do it in between SQE1 and 2, or even afterwards. You can bank it, as I said previously, and it doesn't have to be paid work. It could very much be voluntary work. So that's an overview of the SQE route and qualifying work experience. I'm going to hand over to Sarah to look at the 2 routes in a little bit more detail.
Thank you, Alice. So I'm just going to look at some of the key differences between the different academic content of the LPC and the PSC, which is the professional skills course, when it's compared with the 2 vocational aspects of SQE, SQE1 and SQE2. So I'll start with the model that you're probably much more familiar with, the LPC. So as you may probably be aware, the LPC is divided into two stages. Stage 1 is all your compulsory modules, and you've got 3 core modules, which are business, property and litigation, which covers both criminal and civil litigation. And then as part of stage 1, you've also got compulsory modules in wills, solicitors' accounts, and then professional conduct, as you'd expect. Alongside those core modules, you'll also be studying compulsory skills, which are a mixture of oral and written skills. So you cover advocacy, client interviewing, drafting, writing, and practical legal research. Then at stage 1 is completely separate to stage 2. Stage 2 is where you are required to study 3 elective modules, and obviously the choices will vary from provider to provider, but normally there's a range of commercial-based electives through to the more sort of high street-based electives. And the 2 stages combined, once you've passed both, means that you've completed the LPC. The second part of the vocational stage for the LPC route to qualification is, as Alice said, the professional skills course, which essentially is done after the LPC as part of your training contract, because it's building on those foundations that you've encountered as part of your LPC. It's a much shorter course than the LPC, and essentially is 3 compulsory modules, which are finance and business skills, advocacy and communication, and client care and professional standards. So it's very much preparing you for the professional environment that you're going to go into and focusing on those skills that you'll need as a solicitor. In addition to those compulsory modules, you've also have to choose some elective modules totaling at least 24 hours. So there's a minimum of 24 hours required for studying the elective modules. So now let's compare that with the SQE1 route. Alice has already explained that SQE1 is all about that functioning legal knowledge, which you will have done as part of your LPC, but what is different with the SQE1 is that it covers a much broader range of law. Remember, in LPC, you've essentially got 4 or 5 core modules together with your elective legal knowledge, but in SQE1, you're required to cover 13 areas of law. And they're a mixture, and we'll come on to the detail in a minute, but they're a mixture of your LPC knowledge together with knowledge that you would normally see in an undergraduate law degree. The other difference is that the SQE1 focuses on legal principles and is not concerned with case law or statutory references. So it's very much concerned with identifying the legal principles from the case or from statute and applying that legal principle to a client scenario. So it's a very different, it's quite a different focus to the LPC, which is much more essay based in terms of identifying legal principles supported by statute or case and then applying that to a client scenario. SQE2, which, as Alice has already said, covers 6 legal skills across 5 practice areas. And again, in a minute, I will explain what those 5 practice areas is, probably much more familiar to you in the guise of the LPC. So there are aspects of SQE2 which cover similar issues to LPC, such as advocacy, writing, legal research, and client interviewing, and in addition there is a point of difference here in that in addition to being tested on the skills, there is equal weighting to the marks that you receive for law. So you need to have that, not only the grounding in the skill, but also in that functioning legal knowledge from SQE1, and that is something that our students have explained to us is something that is a key issue that they need to be aware of when joining SQE2. The other main difference between the LPC and the SQE route to qualification is the standard to which you as a student are required to work. LPC is very much geared at your position as a day 1 trainee. On the other hand, SQE 1 and 2 are testing your knowledge and skills as a day one newly qualified solicitor. So it's looking at the position 2 years on from where you would be in the LPC. So that's another big difference that you've got to be aware of when considering your options. So moving on to the subjects covered in the SQE. I'm not going to go through these in any great detail, but I think this slide just demonstrates the breadth of knowledge that you're required at both SQE 1 and SQE 2. So SQE 1, you'll see already that, as I've already mentioned, sort of you've got business law, property practice and dispute resolution and criminal practice, which are those subjects that you would typically cover in an LPC regime, together with all of those sort of foundation subjects that you'd study as a part of your law degree, such as contract, tort, land, trusts, etc. So it's covering a much broader range of knowledge than that covered in the LPC. On the right-hand side of the screen, you'll see SQE 2. As I said, it's developing those legal skills that you would also develop as part of your LPC. In a similar context, but again, that functioning legal knowledge is much wider because it covers both the LPC, litigation, property practice, etc. Those kind of practice areas, but underpinned by the rest of that functioning legal knowledge from SQE 1. And I'd just like to emphasise again that you really need to hit the ground running with your knowledge in those practice areas when you come to studying SQE 2, because you need to be on top of that in order to be able to apply your skills in the correct way. So that's the subjects covered in SQE 1. So now I just want to have a look at the slightly different approaches, well, in some cases, very different approaches to the assessments in LPC and SQE 1. So as Alice has already, so looking at the LPC first, as Alice has already said, in terms of the LPC, each provider designs and sets their own assessments, but obviously underpinned by the SRA assessment specifications. The LPC is usually open book and mainly consists of written assessments for those core modules at stage 1 and the elective assessments at stage 2. They're mostly what you would normally expect to see, problem solving. So you're given scenarios from client facts and emails, and then you are required to set out the law and apply it to your client in order to be able to provide advice to them. So that's the main bulk of those written assessments. You may come across some multiple choice questions as part of those assessments, but they would only be a small percentage of the total overall marks for the written assessments. The oral skills assessments and the written skills assessments are all done on a competency basis. So you're either getting to the benchmark of competent, or if you're not quite there, then you'll be not yet competent. And those skills assessments are sometimes combined with some of the other subjects. So, for example, quite a lot of the writing and interviewing assessments will be done as part of the assessment for example, testing your knowledge of wills and testing your knowledge of property, for example. So again, the number of assessments is going to be smaller than you come across in SQE 2. So normally you'll just have one assessment for each of the skills. So there'll be a total of 5 skills assessments. And as we'll see, when compared with SQE 2, you're going to have to tackle 16 assessments for SQE 2. The other difference, as well as the difference in standard, is that in order to pass the LPC, you have got 3 attempts, but you've got to pass the whole of the LPC stage 1 and stage 2 within a 5-year period. And that's compared with obviously the 6-year period for completing SQE 1 and SQE 2. So now let's move over to SQE 1, which is where the big difference is from the LPC approach. SQE 1, as you're probably aware and have heard lots of information about, is based, as Alice said, on 360 multiple choice questions. But don't be fooled by that name, multiple choice. They are very different from the type of multiple choice questions that you're likely to have come across either as an undergraduate or perhaps if you've already completed the LPC. They are very rigorous, and they're looking for the single best answer. So all of the possible options that you can choose from as part of your multiple choice, all of them are plausible at first blush, and you have got to pick the best single answer based on the law and the application. And that requires a real laser focus, and we can't emphasize enough, which again means that you need to have that knowledge at your fingertips to be able to apply that law and that principle during the 2.5 hours that you'll be required to undertake each MCQ exam. So it's no mean feat. And as I say, again, difference to LPC, SQE1 is all closed book. So you haven't got any props or any materials that you can take into the exam that can sort of help you through that process. Just in terms of just again reiterating SQE1, what Alice has already said, the difference between the LPC and the SQE1 is that obviously the SQE1 assessments are all set by the SRA and run by Kaplan, and so there is a level of consistency there, so that everyone is working to the same standard in assessment as compared with the LPC, where the SRA was concerned that there was a lack of consistency between the providers, which was one of the reasons why the SQE1 and SQE2 routes were brought in to provide that level playing field. So moving on to the next slide, and just comparing, I've already started to talk about some aspects of SQE2, but just comparing the last elements of the LPC regime and the last element of the SQE regime. So the professional skills course, very few assessments for this particular course. You just have one assessment which is in financial and business services, and then the other subjects, I say simply, but you're required to attend workshops and with a minimum number of hours, and also you have to undertake a skills appraisal as well. But it's very much on-the-job training as opposed to being within a sort of educational environment. SQE2 is very much aligned to what you'd expect from the LPC skills components. But as I said, the exam is a much broader and bigger range of assessments. So SQE2 is one exam, but with 16 assessment stations within those written and oral skills. So as I've already said, in LPC, you'd have one assessment for each skill. Here you've got 12 assessments for the written skills, 4 assessments for the oral skills. And as Alice has already said, you will be taking those over a 5-day period consisting of 5 half days. And the next dates for SQE2, in case you're interested, are in October 2022, and the booking window for those particular exams opens mid-June. So that's a little bit of information about the differences between the assessment approaches for LPC and SQE routes to qualification. Now I just want to compare the next aspect, which obviously is important when you're considering which route to go down. So you'll be familiar obviously with the LPC route and the training contract, which is obviously normally done after you've completed your LPC, although sometimes you can do an LPC alongside a part-time training contract. The training contract route is often called the golden ticket because it's often quite difficult to get training contracts straight away unless you're going for training contracts within very big firms. Quite often firms like to test the water out and will employ people as paralegals before offering training contracts. So sometimes it is difficult to get hold of those training contracts. If you have got a training contract, then obviously that requires 2 years full-time or equivalent over a part-time basis. And as Alice has already said, the training contract usually consists of 4 seats, each of 6 months each, after which time your training contract will be signed off by your training provider, so long as you have met the requirements that have been set. As Alice has also said, all training contracts have got to be with an authorised training provider because of their requirements to supervise and make sure that trainees have got the correct competencies and standards in order to carry on as and become qualified as a solicitor. So that's the sort of more familiar route. So moving on to SQE route and the qualifying work experience. As Alice has already said, there is much more flexibility in relation to qualifying work experience. Alice has already mentioned it can be done before, during or after any of the SQE assessments. And this is the learn while you earn. And the SRA are very much keen to enable candidates to obtain that qualifying work experience, especially before SQE2, which is what they envisage would happen, with that you do qualifying work experience before you sat SQE2. Alice has already again mentioned that similar to the LPC route, you require 2 years of qualifying work experience in total, but unlike the training contract, which normally is with one training provider, you can do your qualifying work experience in up to 4 organisations. But again, as Alice has said, do check out the quality of that work and have conversations with organisations for whom you're doing work to make sure that it is of the requisite type that you want as part of your career progression, and that they are going to be able to help you sign off that work at the end of qualifying work experience. So, as Alice has said, the qualifying work experience is not testing your competence to be a solicitor. That's tested by the SQE1 and SQE2 exams. What qualifying work experience is all about developing those competence and skills to be a solicitor. And the SRA have said there's a long list of solicitor competencies, and what we're working at is those day one solicitor competencies, which is known as the threshold standard. So as you qualify, and there's a whole list of what those competencies are, which are set out on the SRA website. And the SRA have said you need to develop a minimum of 2 competencies in order to satisfy qualifying work experience. But what that does mean is that if you are already thinking that you're going to go into a specialised area, you can focus on those competencies in that particular area of law, rather than having to be exposed, as you would under a training contract, to 4 different legal areas. That's one of the differences with QWE. As Alice has already said, that we're not testing, the QWE provider is not testing the person's competencies, but the QWE does have to be signed off or confirmed by a solicitor or a regulated compliance officer. And unlike the training contract, your QWE provider does not have to be an authorised training provider, which again opens up the field for where you can undertake your qualifying work experience. As Alice has already said, that could be a paralegal position, that could be voluntary work, it could be work in a law clinic, for example, if you're doing that as part of your law degree. But again, do check to make sure that the quality of the work that you're receiving is going to be of a standard that's going to stand you in good stead for your career, because we're already getting evidence that firms will look at that quality of the work experience as part of their recruitment process going forward. So that was some differences between training contracts and qualifying work experience. So now I just want to move on to some of the exemptions that Alice has mentioned. For example, the first one we're going to look at is, do you have your LPC already? And I know that quite a lot of people who are attending this seminar may be already in that position. So if you have already got an LPC, then you've got 2 choices, which are set out on the left-hand side of the screen. You can either continue down the LPC route, and what you'll need to qualify is your training contract. So obviously, if you have already got a training contract, then it's probably best to carry on down that route. However, you may not have a training contract, but you might already be working in a legal role, in which case you might want to switch tracks and move from the LPC route to qualification and switch to the SQE route to qualification, in which case, as well as your LPC, what you'd need in order to qualify as a solicitor is your SQE2, the skills element of the SQE exams, together with your qualifying work experience. And as I've said, that might be of interest. Well, that probably be of interest to you if you are already in a paralegal or other legal position. So that's the position if you have already got your LPC. If you're at an earlier stage of your pathway to qualification, so you're either on a law degree or you've started a GDL, a conversion course, then again, you've got two options, but the steps that you need to go to qualify are going to be greater than those if you've already got your LPC. So again, if you are studying a law degree or on a conversion course, then you can carry on down the traditional LPC route. So for that, you need to obtain your LPC and then your training contract. Again, if you're already studying on a law degree or GDL, you might already be in legal work, or perhaps doing legal work as part of your law degree, in which case you might want to consider going down the SQE route, in which case you'd need to do both parts of the SQE exams, part 1 and part 2, and then you could use your qualifying work experience, maybe you've already got some under your belt, and use that to qualify under the SQE route. So as you can see, there are quite a number of options open to you for whatever stage of your pathway you're currently on. So the other type of exemption that we just want to talk about is if you're already a qualified lawyer, and that might be a qualified lawyer in another jurisdiction, and we know there's a couple of people on this seminar who are in that position, or perhaps you're qualified as a barrister or as a legal exec in the UK, in which case you'd also count as a qualified lawyer. And if you are in that position, then the first thing that you'll need to do is you'll need to go onto the SRA website to see whether the qualification that you hold enables you to get an exemption from one or both parts of the SQE exams. At the moment, there are a limited number of jurisdictions where the SRA have agreed exemptions, but it is worth checking the SRA website for those, because the SRA are constantly updating their systems and their exemptions. If you are in a position where you can get exemptions, then you'll need to go onto the SRA website to see which parts of the exams you're exempt from. As things currently stand, most of the exemptions are for SQE2, so most qualified lawyers will still need to undertake SQE1, but you might be exempt from SQE2. But it's definitely worth looking at those exemptions and then applying for them if you feel that they are applicable for you. If you're not fortunate enough to have any of the exemptions that are listed on the SRA, or you don't feel that you qualify for an individual exemption, then you'll need to undertake the whole SQE pathway, SQE1 and SQE2 as well, in order to qualify as a lawyer in England and Wales. So that hopefully gives you an insight into some of the exemptions that are available. We're now going to move on to look at some examples of how firms are approaching the SQE route. But before we do that, we'll move on to just providing an overview of what options you need to think about when deciding SQE or the LPC route and which one is best for you. We've already talked about some of those issues that you need to think about. So in terms of how quickly you want to qualify, we've already seen that the LPC normally takes 1 year for a full-time or 2 years for a part-time course. The SQE preparation courses, if you decide to go down that route before you undertake the exams, they are much shorter than that. They're usually 2 or 3 months long. But what I would say is that although the time period is shorter, they are very much more intense than the LPC. So that shouldn't be underestimated, and that should be part of your consideration. How much time do you really have to devote to your studies? We've already talked about the fact that you might already have qualifying work experience, and from our perspective, we have got a lot of students on who are studying SQE2 because they have already got that qualifying work experience, so they want to qualify down the SQE route rather than going down the LPC route. Another thing to think about is how you're going to pay for the course. And obviously we've put some examples of how that might happen on this slide. One thing to note is that both the LPC and the SQE preparation courses can be wrapped up in an LLM, and we offer that as well as part of our program offerings. And if they are wrapped up in an LLM, then that means that you should be eligible for postgraduate loan from student finance. So again, that's something to bear in mind as part of your considerations for either option. We've already talked about learning while you're earning. Obviously, it's possible for both routes, but probably there's more scope for that down the SQE route. An important consideration is obviously how you learn and how you best, what assessment style suits you best. In terms of the LPC, a lot of the LPC providers follow that more traditional pathway of on-campus face-to-face teaching. The SQE route has opened up a lot more options to study online, and obviously the college as a totally online provider is one of those. So think about your preferred mode of study and how that best fits into your other commitments as well. Online study can be much more flexible in terms of how you fit that around your other commitments. We've already talked about the other thing that is on this slide is, do you want to specialise in the practice area, or do you already know where you want to go? Or perhaps you're already working as a paralegal in a specialised area and you know that that's where you want to continue working after you qualify. In which case, the SQE route might be the route for you, because you can obviously focus your qualifying work experience into that practice area. And finally, and this links on to the slide that Alice is going to talk about next, is who do you want to work for? A lot of employers are already looking at SQE options as part of their training regime, and Alice is going to cover some of those options in a minute. But do research the firm that you want to work for and see what options you've got in relation to whether they require the new SQE route qualification, or are they still considering applicants using the LPC route. So that, I think, neatly leads on to the next slide that Alice is now going to cover.
Thank you, Sarah. We do get a lot of questions about the LPC or SQE, and also really what the firms are doing, because they are your future employer at the end of the day. So we find that our potential future students are very keen to know what's happening out there. And I guess we just wanted to give you an example of some firms that have already moved to the SQE. Some are keeping SQE and LPC routes open, and many actually are allowing that choice for future trainees who want to come to them if they've already started the LPC or the SQE, and they will consider taking you on that training contract. So don't think that the SQE route rules you out of securing what they would say is a training contract. They are moving to SQE training contracts. But there are also lots of other ways in which firms are approaching the SQE route. So just to give you a few examples, these are all our partners. We all work with them on providing training. So Acuity Law is really interesting. They're a firm based in Bristol, London and Wales. They do a variety of legal services, and they are offering both an LPC and a training contract and an SQE training contract. And actually, it's open now for applications. And their SQE training contract they're offering is one which does have 4 different practice areas alongside their SQ1 and then their SQ2 training, but also a specialised SQE training contract where you can completely focus on one practice area. So they have opened up both those options, and we are delivering that SQE preparation training to their trainees. They are going to call them trainees. So Reed Smith moved very early to the SQE, and we're pleased to be able to we're providing a lot of legal business skills training and transactional skills training to their trainees. They've recognised and taken this opportunity to really look at the concept of electives, and what they've done is they've thought about actually what are the skills that they want to see and their competencies that they want to see in their future newly qualified solicitors. So what they're doing is they're really focusing on human and business skills, and we're working with them to develop that kind of training alongside study for the SQE. Wright Hassel have taken an approach where they've looked at their paralegal base. So if you're able to get a paralegal position, or after SQE1, you're able to secure a paralegal role, they've looked at their paralegals, and I think Sarah mentioned this, and they are recruiting from within the paralegal base. They're looking to upskill them and develop their talent, and offering them funding to take the SQE preparation courses with us. AccuTrainee, I don't know if you've heard of AccuTrainee, one of our partners who provide lots of contracts. So if you're unable to get a long-term permanent position in legal services, AccuTrainee will take on people, students who do have an LPC or have an element of SQE. And they will also take on, they've just launched a training contract themselves where they are the employer. You will do contracts with a number of different organisations, and they will fund your SQE route to qualification and sign off your QWE. So they are offering both the employment side of it with a range of firms and experiences, and also the SQE prep training with the college. BCLP, some of their transactional electives that their future trainees can choose to take alongside SQE, they're moving to it next year, are delivered by the college, and they've really looked at specific practice areas where they feel they want to develop real excellence and technical excellence, and we're working with them. If they choose, their students can take our modules with that, and that's alongside the SQE study as well. And then M&S, we have a great example of one of our current LLM students at M&S. And he's been a paralegal for a number of years. He didn't want to do an LPC to start with. He decided to go into employment after his undergraduate law degree. He's very, very capable of what he does, and he's now studying the LLM and legal practice with the college. And M&S are funding that opportunity for him, but that didn't come straight away from university. He did go there and work in their in-house department for a few years. So I just hope that gives you a kind of flavour of the type of approaches that firms are taking. I think to sum up at the end of all of this, I think both what Sarah and I would say is, whilst this may feel like a choice that's, a once in a moment choice for now, actually isn't, because you can switch between certainly the LPC to the SQE route. And just if you do decide to take the SQE and you start taking your SQE1 preparation for SQE1 assessment, that doesn't preclude you either for then applying for training contracts and being able to get those training contracts down the line. So we do want to reassure you that whilst you want to make the right choice for now, actually there are opportunities for you in your career along the way. If you're focusing on getting that training contract and getting that job that you want to do at the end of the day, both the LPC and the SQE route will give you those opportunities. So yeah, I don't know if there's anything you want to add to that, Sarah, before we close.
No, I think that you covered it all very well, Alice. But I think what I would say is, I think you've just got to watch the space and keep an eye on what firms are doing in terms of their training programs, because I think you already mentioned this, over the next couple of years, I think the landscape's going to really change, and that the SQE, once it becomes much more familiar and firms become more familiar with what's involved, will be moving to that SQE route as opposed to the LPC route. But yeah, keep your options open. You're not wedded to one route, as Alice said, if your plans change or your direction changes a little bit.
Thank you, Sarah. So if you do want to ask us any questions, you can just pop them in the chat bar now. We've also got a session that's just opened where you can pop on and put your video or your mic on and just ask us a question. You might have some particular circumstances that you want to share with us, or ask us an individual question about qualifying work experience. We'd be very pleased to answer those. So yeah, any questions, please add them in, and I'll just run through what you may wish to do next. So If you're interested in learning more about the SQE and the college's preparation courses, please do come along to an event. We have open evenings every few months. We've got our next open evening in a few weeks' time on 23rd of June. And we've also got a webinar that will specifically look at our preparation courses in July. I will share those with you with the recording of this webinar in an email in the next few days. It would also be fantastic if you wish to stay up to date with us, if you want to subscribe or follow us on LinkedIn or Instagram. So no further questions. So I'd like to say thank you, Sarah, for joining us today. And what we'll do is we'll pop over to a session. You can see it on the left-hand side. It says sessions now. And anyone who wants to ask any more questions, please feel free to join us there. Okay, thank you so much for your time. Thanks.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you.